Behind every locked door lies a story the world was never meant to hear. Welcome to Behind Bars TV, where we uncover the hidden realities of the world's toughest prisons, untold inmate experiences, and the systems built to contain them. From supermax facilities to forgotten penitentiaries, we revealed the truth behind concrete walls and razor wire. This is not fiction. This is the world behind bars. Attica Prison, New York, Systemic Abuse, State Powerful Crime Documentary. The day the prison took over. On September 9, 1971, the state of New York lost control of its most feared prison. Not for minutes, not for hours, for 4 days. Inside these walls, inmates took guards hostage, negotiated directly with the government, and forced America to look at something it had ignored for decades. This was not a riot. It was an uprising. And when the state took Attica back, it did so with lethal force. What happened here would become one of the darkest chapters in American prison history. This is Attica Correctional Facility. And this is the story the system tried to bury. The prison built to dominate. Attica Correctional Facility opened in 1931. It was not designed for rehabilitation. It was designed for containment. Located in rural western New York, far from the cities most inmates came from, Attica was intentionally isolated. No nearby communities. No public scrutiny. No easy access for families. This wasn't accidental. Isolation was part of the punishment. Who Attica held. By the late 1960s, Attica housed more than 2,200 men. Most were poor, young, Black or Latino. Many were serving long sentences for nonviolent crimes. Yet the prison operated under rules closer to the 19th century than the modern era. Daily life inside Attica. Life inside Attica was defined by deprivation. 1 shower per week. 1 roll of toilet paper per month. 1 book at a time. Medical care was slow or denied. Food was scarce and often spoiled. Mail was censored. Inmates worked for pennies a day. Complaints were ignored. And discipline was absolute. The rule of silence. Talking back meant punishment. Organizing meant solitary confinement. Speaking up meant retaliation. Attica enforced control not through constant violence, but through the threat of it. For years, the pressure built quietly, until one morning it exploded. The spark that set Attica on fire. The spark that set Attica on fire. Uprisings don't start with speeches. They start with moments. At Attica, that moment came on the morning of September 9, 1971. A small confrontation. A routine act of discipline. A situation that, under normal circumstances, would have ended quietly. But Attica was not normal. The incident. Accounts differ, but the core facts remain. An inmate was disciplined after an altercation with a guard. Tensions flared. Inmates gathered. Orders were given. Orders were questioned. Then someone ran. And when one man ran, hundreds followed. The moment control collapsed. In the confusion, a gate was breached. Inmates surged into D Yard, the heart of the prison. Guards were overwhelmed. Some were beaten. Others were captured. Within minutes, Attica was no longer under state control. It belonged to the inmates. 4 days of freedom inside a cage. By mid-morning, Attica was effectively split in two. The state held the outer prison. The inmates held the yard. 39 correctional officers and civilian employees were taken hostage. And for the first time in American prison history, inmates began to organize openly. Order inside chaos. Contrary to public fear, D-Yard did not descend into anarchy. Inmates formed security teams, medical stations, food distribution points. Violence between inmates was prohibited. Those who broke the rules were restrained, not executed. This wasn't mob rule. It was self-governance. The leaders emerge. Men with credibility stepped forward. Some were politically educated. Some were respected for discipline. Others were trusted for calm under pressure. The influence of outside movements, civil rights, anti-war activism, prison reform, was undeniable. Names like George Jackson echoed through the yard, not because he was present, but because his ideas were. The demands that shocked America. The inmates didn't ask for escape. They didn't ask for revenge. They presented demands. And they were precise. The core demands. The inmates demanded an end to physical abuse, adequate medical care, fair wages for prison labor, access to education, religious freedom, protection from retaliation, and, most controversially, amnesty for actions taken during the uprising. These were not radical demands. They were human ones. Why the state panicked? To prison officials, these demands were dangerous, not because they were unreasonable, but because they were public. National media arrived. Politicians paid attention. America was watching prisoners speak for themselves. And that terrified the system. Negotiating with men the state refused to hear. By the afternoon of September 9th, the uprising had a structure, and structure forced the state to respond. Negotiators entered Attica not with weapons, but with notebooks. Lawyers, journalists, politicians, civil rights leaders, men invited by the inmates to witness what was happening, so the truth couldn't be erased later. The observers. The inmate negotiating committee insisted on independent observers. Among them were attorneys, clergy, and public figures, people whose presence alone changed the balance of power. For the first time, incarcerated men were not speaking into a void. They were speaking into the national record. A fragile dialogue. For hours, demands were read aloud. Responses came back measured, careful, non-committal. The state listened, but it did not agree, especially not to amnesty. That single word, amnesty, would decide everything. Media, race, and fear. As cameras rolled, another force entered the equation, public fear. Attica's inmate population was overwhelmingly black and Latino. Its guards were almost entirely white. That reality shaped coverage. Rumors spread fast. Claims of violence against hostages, many unverified, ran on air. Fear moved faster than facts. The story the public heard. Viewers were told the hostages were being tortured, that demands were extremist, that chaos ruled the yard. Much of it wasn't true. But once fear takes hold, corrections follow too late. The racial undertone. In 1971, America was already tense. Civil rights struggles, anti-war protests, urban unrest. Attica became a symbol, not of prison reform, but of loss of control. And for many in power, that could not stand. The governor's choice. The final decision did not happen at Attica. It happened miles away, behind desks and closed doors. New York's governor was urged to intervene personally. Inmates requested his presence. He declined. Instead, preparations were made, not for compromise, but for force. Why amnesty was a line too far. Granting amnesty would set a precedent. It would acknowledge abuse, validate resistance, invite other prisons to follow. To the state, that risk outweighed lives. The order was given. Attica would be retaken. The assault. On the morning of September 13, 1971, the state moved. State troopers, correction officers, National Guard, helicopters dropped tear gas into D-Yard. Visibility collapsed. Sound vanished. Orders came fast. What followed lasted minutes, but reshaped history. What really happened in D-Yard? When the gas hit, negotiations ended instantly. Inmates and hostages were disoriented. Gunfire erupted. When it stopped, 43 people were dead. 10 were hostages. 33 were inmates. Every hostage died from gunfire, not from inmate violence. That fact would be hidden for years. The cover-up. Within hours, officials announced a narrative that inmates had murdered hostages, that the assault was necessary. Medical examiners' reports contradicted this. But the state stood firm. For a long time, the lie held. Autopsies don't lie. Independent examinations revealed the truth. Every hostage died from bullets fired by state forces. None were killed by inmates. This single revelation collapsed the official story. But accountability did not follow. Survivors speak. Survivors described retaliation after the assault, beatings, humiliation, isolation. Many accounts matched. Few were believed at the time. Years passed before lawsuits forced records open. The legal aftermath. Decades of litigation followed. Inmates sued the state. Families of hostages sued the state. Settlements were reached. But no state official was criminally convicted. The system absorbed the shock and moved on. What Attica changed? Attica forced reforms. Oversight increased. Some conditions improved. The word rights entered prison policy. But the deeper structure remained. Control first. Accountability later, if ever. The lesson the state learned. The lesson wasn't about listening. It was about containment. Prevent organizing. Control narratives. Act decisively. Attica became a blueprint, not for reform, but for response. Why Attica still matters. Every time prisoners protest conditions, Attica is invoked. As a warning, as a memory, as a threat. The message is clear. Challenge the system, and the system will answer. Systemic abuse isn't history. Attica wasn't an anomaly. It was exposure. A moment when the curtain lifted and quickly fell again. The structures that produced Attica still exist. They just operate quieter now. Final verdict. State power unchecked. Attica showed the world what happens when human beings are pushed beyond silence. And what happens when the state decides force is easier than reform. This was not just a prison uprising. It was a test of power. And power, when threatened, responded exactly as it was built to. Attica didn't end in 1971. It echoes. The lies that lived longer than the dead. When the gunfire stopped at Attica, the violence did not. It simply changed form. The state moved quickly, not to investigate, but to define the story. Within hours, officials told the public that inmates had murdered the hostages. They described slashed throats, mutilation, savage revenge. None of it was true. But truth was never the priority. Why the lie was necessary. If the public believed inmates killed hostages, the assault would be justified. If the public believed the state killed everyone, it would be unforgivable. So the lie wasn't optional. It was strategic. And it worked at first. Psychological torture after the assault. Inmates forced to crawl naked through a corridor. Implied only, no graphic detail. Guards shouting orders. Power dynamics emphasized. Survivors described what came next as worse than the uprising. Forced nudity, beatings, verbal degradation. Men were made to crawl through mud and glass. Not to gather information. Not to restore order. But to reassert dominance. This wasn't discipline. It was punishment for resistance. Why this part was hidden? Because it didn't happen in the yard. It happened away from cameras. And power prefers privacy. When justice looked away. Years later, investigations confirmed the cover-up. Autopsies. Ballistics. Testimony. The truth was undeniable. And yet, no governor went to prison. No commander was convicted. No system was dismantled. The message was unmistakable. The state can admit wrongdoing without consequences. Why Attica scared the government? Attica terrified officials for one reason. The inmates didn't riot blindly. They organized, negotiated, communicated clearly. They proved something dangerous. That incarcerated people could articulate injustice better than the state. That possibility had to be buried. How Attica shaped modern prisons. After Attica, prisons changed, but not how reformers hoped. Instead of addressing conditions, systems focused on prevention of uprising, segregation of organizers, intelligence gathering, surveillance, rapid response tactical units. Supermax prisons didn't exist before Attica. After Attica, they became normal. Attica's DNA in today's system. Every modern prison protest is treated as a security threat, not a grievance, not a conversation, a threat. That mindset was cemented at Attica. What Attica teaches about power. Attica teaches a brutal lesson. Institutions respond to exposure with force, to demands with delay, to accountability with silence. And when threatened, they close ranks. What you just saw is more than a story. It's a reality lived by thousands behind bars. If you believe in uncovering the truth, the kind hidden behind concrete walls and silence, then join us. Subscribe to Behind Bars TV and never miss a chapter in the world's most dangerous stories. Until next time, stay aware, stay informed, subscribe, and stay locked in. Until next time, keep your mind open and your curiosity sharp. Remember, freedom and confinement are sometimes only a wall apart.